Hi everyone, my name is Karlie Wylie and I'm a BCBA in the Charlotte, North Carolina region. Today we'll be talking about understanding and implementing the different chaining procedures. So first off, what is a chaining procedure? Well, a chaining procedure is an instructional strategy where a behavior chain or a task is broken down into smaller steps and then each step is taught within that sequence. So first, you need to create a task analysis of the behavior chain or task that you want to teach. So number one, you identify what you want to teach. So this might be hand washing, toothbrushing, tying shoes, buttoning a button, etc. Two, you break this behavior chain or task down into steps. There's 3 ways to do that. You can research it, see it, or do it. Or you could do all 3. So research it. You look up the steps on how to do it. See it. You watch someone else perform the steps and you document them. Or you do it. So you do the steps yourself and you document them. So this is an example of how you would break down the behavior chain of hand washing into smaller steps. I'm obviously not going to go over every step, but as you see, something as simple as hand washing can be broken down into 20 or more steps. So let's talk about the 3 types of chaining procedures. We've got forward chaining, backward chaining, and total task chaining. So with forward chaining, you teach a behavior chain or a task beginning with the first step, and it's usually recommended if the client can successfully complete more steps at the beginning of the behavior chain versus the end. With backward chaining, it's the opposite. You teach a behavior chain beginning with the last step, and it's usually recommended for clients that can successfully complete more steps at the end of the behavior chain versus the beginning. With total task chaining, you teach the complete behavior chain one step after another. So this is usually recommended if the client has the prerequisite skills to complete all of the steps in the task, and it wouldn't require many trials to meet mastery criteria. All right, so let's take a closer look at forward chaining procedures. As I said before, in a forward chaining procedure, the first step of the behavior chain is taught first. For example, if we're looking at hand washing, the first step of go to sink is taught first. The first step is prompted until it's at an independent level, and then every other step after that is prompted, usually physically. When the first step is at an independent level, then you move on to the first 2 steps, and then the first 3 steps, and so on. There are advantages and disadvantages of using a forward chaining procedure. The advantages are that behavior momentum can be utilized, as the first step is often the simplest and easiest step of the task analysis. Forward chaining procedures are also super easy to teach staff to implement, and each response in the behavior chain is paired with reinforcement while that response is being taught. So a disadvantage of forward chaining is that the learner doesn't come into contact with a natural reinforcer for completing the step. For example, if you're washing hands, the natural reinforcement for that would be clean hands and the task being complete. All right, so let's take a look at a forward chaining procedure with hand washing. As you see, the first step of the task analysis is being taught first, and then every step after that will be physically prompted. When he has mastered the first step, then we will move on to the first 2 steps, then the first 3 steps, etc. I do want to note that I do have consent to record this video and release it. All right, so now let's take a look at backward chaining procedures. So this is the opposite of forward chaining. In a backward chaining procedure, the last step is taught first. So, for example, if we're teaching hand washing, which is super important right now with COVID-19, the last step of putting the towel back on the rack will be taught first. And then after he's at an independent level with the last step, then we will teach the last 2 steps and the last 3 steps and so on. I do want to note, just as in forward chaining, all of the steps that are not currently being taught will be physically prompted. So there are a couple of advantages and disadvantages. So a disadvantage would be that mastery usually takes longer when you're teaching it using a backward chaining procedure versus forward and total task chaining. An advantage of backward chaining is that it does allow the client to experience results quicker and access natural reinforcement. As we mentioned before, natural reinforcement for hand washing would be having clean hands and the task being complete. All right, now we're going to take a look at backward chaining procedures for hand washing. As you see, we're physically prompting every step except the last one. When he's at an independent level with the last step, then we'll move on to the last 2 steps, last 3 steps, last 4 steps until we are at step 1. Okay, now let's take a look at the last chaining procedure, which is total task chaining. In a total task chaining procedure, the adult walks the client through each step, prompting as necessary. So this is what teachers and parents do naturally when they teach a skill. So for hand washing, okay, let's turn on water. Great job. Now let's wet our hands. Awesome. Okay, turn off the water now until we get to the very last step. So there are advantages and disadvantages of total task chaining. Advantages would be that reinforcement is provided after each step of the behavior chain. It's usually social praise. And there is an opportunity for training with each implementation of the behavior chain because you are walking the client through each step every time. So the 2 disadvantages of total task chaining is that unfortunately, for many children with autism and learning disabilities, this may be too complex of a teaching style. And this chaining style doesn't require mastery before adding additional steps to the behavior chain. So he might not have step 1 before we add in step 2 and step 3 and step 4. So now we're seeing a total task chaining procedure with hand washing. We are using least to most prompting and prompting through each step of the behavior chain. So those were the 3 chaining procedures, but to close things off, I do have a very important tip for you, which is to be flexible. So you will make changes. Every child is different, and what may work for one child will not work for another. You may have written a very thorough, very well-researched task analysis for completing a skill, and you'll find out that it's not really necessary or possible with a client. So in the washing hands example I gave, one of the steps was interlocking your fingers 2 times. So is it really that important that Timmy interlock his fingers when he's washing hands if he has very poor motor skills? If he can do every other step of the chaining procedure except interlocking hands, are we really going to stop him from meeting mastery criterion? Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this. And if you do have any questions or any statements or any edits that you want to give me, my phone number is listed as well as my email address. Again, thank you so much, guys.